Now, this is Apollo 15. When they were simulating, and Paul and I have done a video on this as well, when they were simulating the landing of this, they actually dropped the machine. Okay? It crashed to the ground. It dropped probably 8 or 10 feet when they were lowering it down on the gantry crane, hard enough that it broke the leg right off. On the one side, the secondary struts are snapped out and the thing kicks out. That's the exhaust bell housing has been crushed on it, and it hit hard enough that the rover came right off. Okay? Broke the rover right off its mounts. On the right are the two schematics of the rover. The top one shows the schematic of the actual lowering arms, how it swung out and down. And on the bottom is, with the rover in place, just the schematic of that square, and then the wheels go in on the angle in there to fill that spot. So when you look over at the actual photograph, the two big arms are the ones at the bottom that come up on the 45-degree angle up to the rover. They're sheared, you can see they're sheared right off. And the close-up photo of it, you can see the lanyards, the spaceship, right? It's a ship, so they're lanyards, cables, right? Both those cables are snapped clean off on there. That's how the Apollo 15 rover got damaged initially. That's how the steering got damaged. That's how the fenders got damaged. The seats were damaged. And as well, one of the batteries, they even logged that the one battery bank was down. It wasn't functioning at all.
And you mentioned here, note the mold on the sewage bag, an example of equipment aging over time. But Scott, doesn't mold itself prove this is not on the moon where there's no atmosphere and no moisture? I don't believe it would be possible to have mold on the moon.
No, but there's a lot on Earth. Flip to the next photo. We'll get to there. Those are their backpacks on the ground. If you look at the top right one, you'll see that one has the covers taken off, and the other one there is sitting up underneath the machine, still together. And of course, the astronaut taking the photograph has to have one on. He can't function out there. And the astronaut in the background's got one on, and only two were supplied.
So we got 2 extra backpacks.
Well, backpack isn't really a backpack. That's just a cooling system for the suit. When you're running around doing a simulation on Earth, you got to keep these guys cool in those suits. And that's all that is. That's the sublimated core. What's laying outside that thing is sublimated core. Before we go to the next photograph, that leg there is the ball swivel joint is snapped right off when it landed. The leg is sitting off to the side of the pad. It's pushed right off to the side. It should be in the center. It's actually broken right off.
Well, the equipment was so flimsy to begin with. I mean, you know, nothing like this could have sustained the actual pressures and stresses to which it was purportedly subjected on the moon. Had any of this been real, I think this flimsy thing would have fallen apart immediately.
Yes. Flip the next one up. There we go. Okay. On the right-hand side there, on the ground, are the ball swivel joints for the secondary strut. Now, they didn't even clean this equipment up. All the broken pieces have been stuffed up underneath the machine. Those are the 2 ball swivel joints that broke off of that leg. Okay? And on the left-hand side, if you're looking, the leg on the left, you can see the distance, the length of that leg is a lot shorter than the one on the right, because they had to bring in another strut long enough to prop it back up, because it was now sitting in that crater.
The one on the right being longer than the one on the left.
Well, the legs actually do compress. The bottom 32 inches compresses down, but if the one on the left had compressed, the foil would have rolled up. Okay?
Yeah.
It hasn't compressed at all. So the other one they replaced it in, the one on the left is 32 inches up to where the secondary strut comes in, and the other one is around 4 feet.
Or 48 inches, a foot longer.
When the astronauts, you see photographs of the astronauts walking up, that's almost at the shoulder height, and the other one's at their waist.
And then, of course, if this had been bona fide, they'd be symmetrical, the same length.
Or they would compress down shorter.
Right.
Now, here's the close-up of this is a museum photograph, what they have on display in the museum. And in the center there, that round core, that is the sublimator on a full active backpack, the PLSS, right? The battery's down on the bottom right, the oxygen tank's on the bottom left, and the 2 oxygen purge tanks are at the top, right? What's on the ground beside that leg is just 2 canisters with that sublimator core to keep the suit cool. Like, they didn't need to have extra oxygen or anything. They're running around on Earth. They just needed to keep the suit cool. And that's what you see. You see that core in there. Pretty amazing, eh? This is Apollo 15. That is the opposite side, straight across from Quadrant 1. On it, Quadrant 3, this is shooting in from Quadrant 3. And you can see the scratch marks down on the bottom and the wrinkle on it. And then on the right is Apollo 17. They never replaced the bell housing underneath it when they were doing the simulations. They fixed the rest of the machine up. Well, they got it off the ground. They got the legs adjusted right for it. Got it back up off the ground. But the same scratches are on there. They're identical scratches on there, and the wrinkle's still in there.
Close enough for government work, Scott.
Yeah, pretty amazing, eh?
Stunning.
This shows that they're simulating. This is the hammer and the feather. Okay? And they dropped the hammer and the feather right beside the strap that broke. That great big strap. You saw the cables that were on the rover. That is the heaviest piece of equipment that they would need, right? On those little tiny cables. This is a gantry lifting strap. 4 of these would lift that machine off the ground. And there it is, broken on the ground.
And what in the world is a feather doing on the moon?
Well, that's where they did the simulate that they were in a vacuum.
Gravitational fall.
Yes, so both fall at the same time. So they nicely set it up so that they dropped it so it would be right beside. So when they shot the hammer and the feather, they're also shooting.
Reminiscent of Galileo and the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Right, but they made sure they dropped it so that the strap would be in the shot. That's why they dropped it in that spot. Okay, this is Apollo 11. And that's one of Buzz Aldrin's cars down the bottom right there. I Googled that to pull that up.
The car is actually in the photograph? At the top there with the arrow?
Yeah.
That's the car? And you can see it on the top right? This is awful. This is so amateurish.
Okay, flip to the next one. There's more than one car in here. There's another one.
I'm breathless. I'm breathless.
It's a junkyard. Over to the right on the rocks, you can see where the car is way back in the distance there. Over to the right of the rocks, there's more cars there buried, sticking up. One's kind of half in, the other one's kind of upside down. It's a virtual junkyard, is what you're looking at. And you realize in the 60s, most people don't realize that, is they didn't recycle metal the same way. They just put them out in yards and disposed of them that way. How do you like that one? That's everybody loves the
Corvette.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very distinctive. Now,
covered in lunar material and dust. I love it, Scott.
Well, you know the spray insulation foam that they use to cover metal?
Yeah.
9/11, insulate the steel so it doesn't burn?
Yeah.
They use the same kind of stuff. Disney used the same kind of stuff to do it. If you look at the old Star Trek, they made the rocks for the original Star Trek out of the same kind of stuff, right? This is how they prepped the set, right? They just sprayed all of that down on it. When you look at this vet that is smashed up there and the windshield's crushed down, it's quite a bit shorter at the front. But what people may not realize is that it was a fiberglass car. So the metal didn't have metal rippled up. When it got into a front end accident, the fiberglass would just break off, right? So what you're looking at, you can see the one arrow there, I'm showing the front axle sitting there. to the rear, and that is the tow bar is still left in place on the front of that, right? The back of it is very distinctive. You can't miss a 1960s Corvette for the shape of that, and there's absolutely no way that a rock would look like that to have the rear axle sitting there like that, in that perfectly round shape, and the rear fenders.
My stomach's just in knots over the absurdity of all of this, Scott.
Okay, now, this is the same crater that ancient aliens found the robot head, right? Well, it's actually just a doll's head. I've found it down here as well. And there's other things. That entire pile of stones down in the middle there, that's just a pile of junk. There's big truck axles and all kinds of stuff in there, transmissions, you name it. And there's 2 more cars right at the bottom of the hill there.
This is just pathetic.
There's a 59 T-Bird down at the bottom of there. Now, this is a central station. This powers all of the experimental equipment. You can see that it's between the different missions. They just left it laying down on its back on the ground. The dirt is stuck to it, and it's actually rusted the metal. You can see that on the bottom left, the zoom in there. You can see the metal's all rusted. So it's just been laying around. Okay?
But it shouldn't rust on the moon either, because there's no atmosphere and no moisture.
Well, considering the fact that the equipment is said to be prepared in a clean room, put in a rocket, unloaded, set up, and then photographed right away. How much time would it have to do any of this stuff? Right? You take it out of the box and you set it up and you take a photograph of it. It's got to be perfectly clean, right?
Just so sloppy. They were so sloppy the way they did all of this, Scott.
Now, what is intentional about this is the astronauts have peeled the foil back to show you that there's nothing inside of it. First of all, it's supposed to have radio communications. It's supposed to collect all of the data from all of the other experiments and relay that information back to the Earth, as well as power all of that other equipment. Okay, and if you look at those so-called computer cables at the bottom, those bands there, that's just translucent film. There's no wires in it. You can see right through it. There's nothing in there at all. Down on the bottom left on the right-hand picture, that piece of steel there, that's an electrical conduit, and up to a switch that looks exactly like what you'd see on an oil furnace. All the computer stuff is supposed to be underneath the bottom panel of that, but there's supposed to be a battery that's about twice the size of a car battery in there powering it, and then the nuclear power generator, RTG, powers and recharges that battery for it. There's no battery in there. That's showing both sides of it with the foil torn off. There's nothing in that machine at all.
This whole thing is a joke, Scott.
Can you imagine that thing is supposed to send the information back to Earth? There isn't even a proper antenna on it. Nothing. This shot is Apollo 12, and this is the same piece of equipment with the experimental package attached to it. And then when you see the little crisscrosses down there, that's where the foil was piled up on it. And then it just came down to the bottom thing. That's exactly what it is. The previous image you were looking at, this is the same thing as it's set up. There's absolutely...
And more preposterous mold on the moon.
It's been laying around. First of all, while they're rehearsing, none of it's functional. They're using the same equipment that they did to practice with. Like they probably thought at one time they were going to go to the moon, right? Wasn't going to happen. They didn't go out and put equipment down or anything else. They just simply are using the same equipment that they were practicing with, which are just mock-ups. None of the equipment is real, right? They're just mock-ups for them to play with. The only thing that was actually running and functioning was the rover. It was the only actual piece of equipment. And here's another piece of equipment on the bottom, on the left-hand side, the arrow showing down there, you can actually see water standing in there. It's perfect, smooth and flat. Okay.
No atmosphere, no water on the moon. Hence another dramatic refutation that this was taken on the moon. It's just so insulting, Scott. It's so insulting from beginning to end.
Right. You take this out of the equipment bay, or the bay in the LEM, set it on the ground and take a picture of it. How could it look like this? How could it get like that within a minute or so after you set it up? You take a picture after you set it up. You can see the water is dried back on the right-hand arrow there, right? The water is dried back and the mud is just caked onto it, and there's actually green mold around the edge of it. Okay? The same equipment is left lying around, Apollo 12 on the left-hand side and Apollo 14 on the right, and you see it's just been out in the sun baking until it started to crack.
Where do you surmise this was taken?
The landfill site, which is still in operation today, which is not only a military but a NASA landfill site, is on the southeast corner of Cinder Lake.
Of which lake?
Cinder Lake in Arizona. Cinder Lake is the mock-up they did of the lunar surface, where they put all the craters and blew all the craters in.
So it was actually shot in Arizona.
Well, I've had other people tell me to look other places because they believe it was other places. But then I went back and I looked at the log files. I studied all the astronauts. I studied all their log files, all their schedules, everything else, right? And they were flying back and forth between Florida and Arizona, right? I mean, you can't just make those things up, because those schedules are there, and those astronauts, I mean, they're media magnets, right? They're being interviewed every day. So they have to be where they said they're going to be, right? You can't interview a guy if he's off there, or if he's in Australia, or he's somewhere else, right? Like every day they were in the media. They're being interviewed while they're doing the training, everything else, because there was such a hype about it. So the log file, when they say they took a T-38 trainer and flew from here to here, that's probably where they were. Well, that comes right up to the liftoff. Their schedules go right up to the liftoff. Okay? It's the only two places they can be.
Florida or Arizona?
Well, they had simulators in both, right? They had the large gantry crane. They did the practice simulation of landing the thing.
This suggests to me that Stanley Kubrick may not have had to have been involved. And so much of this is so amateurish. I don't believe this is consistent with his standards.
I think he would have walked away from it. I think NASA did this on their own. Like I said, when I said they weren't capable of faking it, they didn't even really try.
Yeah.
Okay? They still filmed it. They couldn't fake it. They couldn't get there, and they couldn't fake it, but they still filmed it. And that's what you're looking at. And this is the infamous Apollo 17 flag. And you can see that it's soaking wet. Okay? No bones about it. People say it's shadows, or it's this, or it's reflection of this, or whatever. It's soaking wet. Okay? We've already been looking at water on the set. On the left, that's Jack Harrison Smith. They're just playing around in the mud, so he just picked up some mud and smeared it all over his arm there. And 2 photographs later, it's washed off again.
And you can't have mud on the moon any more than you can have water or air.
That is mud. You can see that the suit is wet where it's been washed off.
Yes.
Okay. And you can't have that on the moon either.
Mist.
Little morning mist. Somebody said it could be dust. Well, there's no wind either.
That's right.
The fact of the matter is, it just can't be there. Okay. This is the Surveyor. Okay. This thing managed to get to the moon all by itself. Landed by itself. Didn't need people on board or anybody else.
Didn't even need a transporter.
Okay. What is interesting is the Russian machine is identical to this. The panels, everything, even the way they're cut out, are identical. The only difference I found when I was studying it is the top panels. One are solar panels and the other is supposed to be a high gain antenna. These ones are supposed to be solar panels, and if you look, it's just a piece of particle board with a 1x3 down the front of it. Okay? And the other one, you can see where it was glued down to something else. It could have been old countertop or school desk or something like that. And they're reusing it here.
Now, Scott, the then Soviet Union and the Chinese must be fully aware that this was all an elaborate fraud.
Well, they will be if they watch this show. And you can see there's standing water on top of the on the right there on that panel.
Yes.
You can quite clearly see it, and if you've really got a good thing, you can see where he wiped his finger, because the cuff checklist tells them to wipe their finger. The panoramic mirror on this thing is just covered in dust.
Well, you can even see a reflection from that little mound there in the water.
Yes, absolutely. But the panoramic mirror is pointing on an angle down, and it's covered in dust. The rest of this machine is absolutely whistle clean. I don't know how the thing is covered in dust. And of course, if it rains, everywhere. And they're not going to get out 24 feet up in the air to clean this off. However, they did manage to take a photograph of it. This photograph is supposed to be a docking sequence in space, but not on the lunar surface.
God, this is all just embarrassingly bad. It's so amateurish. I'm just in shock.
This one's really going to get you. Okay? When I was looking back through all the PDFs, a pressure test, they got to about 8 psi, and it blew the window out. That's about all it can handle. That's why they only claim to have 5.5 psi inside the machine. So they duct taped it back together and they put a rain guard on it. Well, the rain guard got broken somehow, probably when they were lifting it with those straps, right? Probably hooked it and broke the rain guard off. So on the right-hand side, there is the window. And of course, even the seal on the window is broken in between the two layers of glass, and the paint's peeling up inside. Now, the photograph on the right is said to be taken halfway to the moon in zero gravity. So in zero gravity, water is running down the window. Okay?
And it's supposed to be 240 below zero and would be frozen if it were real.
And doesn't freeze.
It's all just absurd beyond belief, Scott.
This is just mock-up equipment that they were using to do the filming. None of it's real. None of it's functional. Okay? This is exactly the same equipment for all 6 missions. The same rover, the same LEM. Everything is being used over and over again.
God.
Okay? And of course, you can see there's no footprints around anywhere near that can. It's back there.
Beer can on the moon.
Like I said, if I found the pizza boxes, I'd know what company
I know. God.
I got tons more. This one's great. Look at that nose cone of that rocket up there. That missile.
In the top right?
Yep. That's it in the background. This is Apollo 14. Okay. And in the center picture, you can see where the nose cone is there. Those are 2 cars up on their sides.
Wow.
Okay. Now, down in between, you see the round on the left car up on its side?
Yes.
Just look over a little bit, you'll see a perfectly round ring. That's about a 59 Ford with the Continental kit on it. That's the tire sitting up there, buried in the dirt. That's another car sitting in there. Just to the right of this photograph, the next picture over, on the bottom, that is the Bentley that they even mention in audio, and it's in the transcript.
A Bentley.
That's the Bentley. You can see that car sitting there.
One of the most expensive cars in the world in the landfill.
Yeah, but they threw him out. It's probably Elvis Presley's. Now, this is Apollo 11. Now, Apollo 11 weren't so bold when they were doing stuff. They simply took a photograph of the equipment. So there's a close-up of what's down inside that crater. And you can see the top arrow there. That's a gear with the chain on it. running down. Those are all gear cases, and then this great big case down on the bottom, and it's got this big arm sticking out on it, kind of almost a bucket scissor arm, claw arm sticking out. But that's the actual gear case sitting right there. Kip Teague has tried to hide most of this stuff and erase it and blur it, and he's using Photoshop effects on it, right, to make it grainy and everything else, but they're all right there. That gear case is the same. That chain at the top is just a dead giveaway, right? But all of that stuff down there is just scrap metal parts.
Junk.
Yep. Now you can see how the astronauts, this is Apollo 14, they're using the handle there to point out where that rock is, where that face is, right?
Yes.
And once you understand that the astronauts are pointing it out, okay, there are many ways to point it out. Sometimes they just get off the rover and take a walk out and around it and back. They'll just walk around it and back, and you'll see it sticking out of the dirt or whatever, right? That's how they point it out. Sometimes they use this kind of method. I wouldn't have found that unless I started to understand how the astronauts are pointing it out.
Yeah.
And you could just say, oh, that's just an unusual rock that looks like a face. Okay, but it's painted. It's an Indian head, and the band is painted on the rock. That's a ball bag, you know, when you go grab 100 for the driving range.
Yeah.
Well, some of the golf courses back in the 60s, they just had little miniature golf bags that you carried them out in, right? And the GC on the bottom is a golf course.
Wow.
And of course, then I had to throw the Sea Rock in too, because NASA wants to get rid of the sea. This is Apollo 11. That's the Sea Rock in Apollo 11. And of course, the inset one there is the actual Sea Rock from Apollo 16, right? I have found that same rock in, I can't remember which one I didn't find it in, but I got it out of 5 out of 6 missions. That rock is in there because they're using the same set on the same location. This one, they took a lot of trouble. They had to trench this out to lift this rock up. And that shows you how they sprayed the equipment on the top left there. They're using a plaster or concrete, whatever, to make the rock itself. They're sticking all kinds of unusual pieces, whatever's on the ground, they're just sticking it in there for filler. And then they're putting that spray on, the same as they did over the cars, right? That's the spray. Clay mold spray or whatever. But you can see it shot on, the rock's laying on its side. If it got on there over time, when it was laying down, it would fall vertical onto it, and it shot sideways on and stuck this way. You can see it. But you can see the clear line on where they were doing it, right? Oh, and if you back one up a bit, back that other one back up. On the right, you can see that there's a steel bar there with rope tied around it. See the rope tied around? The knots?
I'm looking at it. I see the end of the bar down here to the right. The arrows are pointing to various aspects of it.
Yeah, where the rope is tied around. There's rope tied around each one. There's the knots on the left-hand side, and you can see the rope going across it. Now this one, there he is pointing it out again, right? The astronaut's nicely pointing it out. And this is a different design on how they made a rock. They made a wire cage and then covered it over. And the close-up is showing you the cage, the mesh that's underneath that rock. And that's just one example of what you'll find. You'll find 3 or 4 more of those in Apollo 15 doing the same thing. Now this is the Apollo 17 press kit. The image is on the right-hand side, okay? The press kit, of course, was released months in advance prior to launch. So somebody was able to completely show the view from the commander's window, the entire view of the entire scene at the bottom there. And then the schematic view at the top right, okay, the lander itself is basically in the middle of that scene. And in the photographs to the left is the bottom right. Okay. These hills, if you look closely on that, they have arrows on them so they can be moved. That little thing in there shows arrows that they can be slid up and down or side to side to move them into place.
So once again, they've got a press kit that reveals features that would only have been discerned had this been real after landing on the moon and you took the photographs, blowing their cover completely. It's difficult to see how this could have been inadvertent.
This shows how they built the set. That said sculptured hills. It says subfloor. Right at the front, it says subfloor.
Yeah.
I'll send you the big one on that. Those are arrows on the lines of the mountains to show that they can slide up and down or move side to side as they place them. So
Scott, this is just embarrassing, just embarrassing.
So I put these 3 photographs together. I put the names of the photographs up there to show the layout. That layout that you're looking down to is actually to the front of that schematic. It's shooting that way.
Nicely done.
What you see on the left is the bottom right on the schematic is the left side of the photographs. That's what you're looking down to.
Nicely done, Scott.
Okay, and they put all that together. This is lyrics for Walking on the Moon. When I was studying through this stuff and I was listening to some music at the time, right, and I was looking at the EVA suit, and I spotted, you can see that it says sunglasses pocket. Okay.
Sunglasses pocket?
Yes. And if you're out on an EVA and you realize how that suit's put together, I mean, that front visor lifts up and down, but then there's an entire glass jar bell in there that locks everything in. You got to take the whole thing off to put sunglasses on, right? And you're certainly not going to do that in a vacuum. Okay. And NASA had payload specialists to reduce every ounce of weight everywhere they could. Okay, they even claimed to have counted every stitch in their spacesuits to keep the weight down. So why would there be a pocket there for sunglasses?
Completely superfluous, presumably. So this is the lyrics by the Police, Walking on the Moon?
These are my lyrics to their song, Walking on the Moon. So it says, show me how to wear these, walking on the moon. I want to look real cool now, walking on the moon. Don't want you to tease me, walking on the moon. Show me how to wear these, walking on the moon. Right? And then at the very bottom it says, give it up, right? Over on the bottom left is NASA, and that's my acronym, not a single apology.
Versus never a straight answer.
Well, everybody else has their own. That's my own. I made that one up. Not a single apology, NASA.
I like this. Some say I am full of wit, while others say just half. So take me on your spaceship and we'll have a good old laugh and we'll go walking on the moon.
Yes, that's my personal quote.
Love it, love it, love it, love it.